Welcome everyone to Soul Machine, and we're looking forward to this podcast a lot. Soul Machine, we've talked about its purpose before, but it's really about performance. Certainly in the tools that I've used and Camille have used in motorcycling and skiing. It's also about the instinctive side, the intuitive side of what we do things and what we can learn from them, the pressure and consequences of your actions, whether that's in what we do and what we've used as tools to help us gain experience. And I know what I've learned in life, I've learned through motorcycling, but it's also in your everyday life and how you can take what we've learned and not have to go through that. And we can not help shortcut you to understanding, but help you to head off and maybe help you with direction. Today is about the brain under impact, which unfortunately I have much experience with. Being 60 years in motorcycling, hitting trees when I was a kid in my yard, and all the way up to when I raced in the World Championship, there were incidents. We have a doctor, and let me make sure I'm pronouncing this correct. Miyami?
It's Mayumi.
Mayumi. I'm sorry, Dr. Prince. Dr. Mayumi Prins. I am so looking forward to this, and I know her daughter, and that's how we got hooked up. And her daughter and I, we were working on another project together, and so this was perfect. And Dr. Prince studies concussion, brain metabolism in the youth athletes, the consequences of repeat mild head injury, and I think even more importantly, returning to activity. And that is only scratching the surface of her expertise. But we want to try to get to as much as we can in our podcast today about her knowledge and expertise, and I'm looking forward to hearing about it. I'm going to hand off now to Camille. This is one of those conversations, Camille, that every athlete, parent, coach, and racer needs to hear about, because it is something that in the past years there's been so much understanding and knowledge that have been gained that we didn't when I was a kid, and we didn't even consider in youth athletics. And I played football as a kid, and raced, of course. And the technology we had in protection and safety devices wasn't anywhere near what they understand today. So, go to you, Camille.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Prince, for being here. I'm super excited to have this dialogue because I too have banged my head a couple times. And you're a leading researcher in brain injury and concussion with a focus on what happens after brain impact, especially in adolescents and youth athletes. Today, we're going to talk about concussions, brain recovery, youth sports, repeated head injuries, and what athletes, parents, coaches, and racers need to understand before returning to activity. I think this is a really important conversation. And before we get into the stories of the sport, I'd love for you to explain in plain language your areas of expertise, what you're studying, and why it matters.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me as well. We definitely love to learn about new sports and the risks that people endure in those activities. So my area of research is in traumatic brain injury, specifically in adolescence. The adolescent brain is going through a multitude of maturational markers, and in the process of doing that, they represent sort of a very vulnerable window of time where certain things are supposed to happen that need to happen in that critical window. And if you have a head injury from sports, you can change or derail that maturational process. And so that age group is a very unique one. And it's really the age group that is the start of a career or lifetime of concussive events for those who go into intensive athletic activities. So it really is sort of the beginning of it all, which to me then it makes it really important group to actually focus on. We're one of only two centers in the world that actually do translational work specifically on the adolescent age group.
My comment on that is I understand that completely. It makes perfect sense, because isn't it true that the brain doesn't fully form until you're in your early or mid 20s, correct? I mean, it's still forming
Sometimes
and
it feels like a little closer to 30.
oh yes, or maybe even 50, right? I mean, but that's a very good point. And I'm sure we could get into a conversation of how girls mature, females mature quicker
Faster.
than with faster than boys.
We have different
Um, I've
vulnerabilities,
been
though.
told that a few times, or in my marriage, that my brain is not fully formed yet. But I understand your point about, and I respect that so much, Dr. Prince, that you are studying and you said you're one of only two centers in the world that has put the focus on the youth brain. And so I'd like to start there a little bit. My first concussion that when I think back to, happened when I was about 12 years old. And I remember I remember the incident. It was in a track in Hallett, Oklahoma, and a bike. I was lapping. I was winning the race. Came from out of my sight, my peripheral vision to the right. Came across my front wheel, knocked me down. I went down, and then the next thing I remember, sitting in a lawn chair in the paddock, near the van that we had that carried the bikes, and I was just sitting there staring. And so that was absolutely, for sure, my first major concussion, and at 12 years old. And then my next one that I remember so well, and this is the question that I was so looking forward to asking you about. When I was 15 years old, I crashed at a track called Texas World Speedway in College Station, is where Texas A&M is. And I remember going into the corner, and the engine seized up. It's called seizing. And it locked up the rear tire and literally threw me all the way to the right. I hit my head. The next thing I remember was Monday, and we're at home. And I was supposed to go to school, and I woke up Monday morning. And I don't remember anything in between. This is the part that I have a question about. Is on Sunday, I won 3 races and finished second in the fourth race and have no memory, nothing, never have. I've been trying to remember since I was then that maybe it'd come back to me, but no memory. And so my question is a very simple one, but it's probably complicated maybe in the response, is how? How did I perform? And of course, that wouldn't even be a consideration today, but no one even paid attention to me. I'm sure I didn't look like I was completely there, but how did I perform at such a high level and have no memory of it?
Well, that's unusual. So you may be a unicorn. Um, the first incident that you had is more typical, right? You fall, you have an incident, you have a period where your memory is not really good, your cognitive function is not very good, and that's what happens when you really jiggle the brain inside the skull. It will impact the cell's capacities to function. Memory centers like the hippocampus or the cortex will have functional problems. Those usually resolve with time, and depending on how significant the concussion is, it may take, a week to 10 days or longer. But what's interesting is that you then gained your motor function back enough to
Right.
perform and kind of went on autopilot during this, and still were having problems with recollection and memory formation.
Yes.
So
Nothing.
it,
I remember nothing from that day.
which
I
is,
remember
is
waking up in my bed Monday morning.
really unusual, because you will see, like
Okay.
most of the athletes these days, if you're watching basketball currently, you see them go down when they've hit their head. You can tell when they get back up, they're not functioning well. They're off balance. Um, those are not going to be the people who are going to be great at playing their sport, right?
Right.
So it is
Right.
unusual for in your case to be able to get back up and to then do that. What's more normal is for us to see things where people cannot function very well, and then the poor performance adds. And this is actually one of the reasons why my mentor, Dr. David Hovda, who actually started the UCLA brain injury program, he actually worked with the military to relay this message as well. so that military personnel, when they're exposed to blast injuries, don't feel like it's a positive thing to tough it out and keep going, because you will put your fellow men and women at risk, because you can't function the same way,
Right.
and so you're not at your best. And so that is why we do a lot of removal from play, and even in the military, we pull people out now. That policy was hard to convince them of, but Dr. Hovde did a really wonderful job working with them, and I think that's why we usually see that trajectory, and it takes time to recover. So your experience is rather unusual in
Okay,
that way.
maybe you'd like to study my brain, uh, right? I mean, it
Incredibly
wouldn't be the first time.
resilient.
Well, or it could be as simple as when my mom would tell me as a kid, you have a really hard head, Freddie. So right. Um, but I've always wondered about that, because that's
Yeah.
exactly what happened, and that's, I mean, maybe a different subject, but with the subconscious part, I was such a focused athlete as a young boy. I mean, today they would call it obsessive compulsive disorder, I'm sure, but I would ride every day for hours and hours and hours, and it was like walking across the room for me. And so anyway, it's just fascinating. I've always been fascinated by that. And I, had the trophies, and Dad said, "Well, you seemed a little bit different." Well, yes, Dad, I obviously was. I don't remember anything. So
Yeah. I mean, we
that
can
that's
do a lot of
interesting.
functions on autopilot, right?
Right, right,
We
right,
do have lots of capabilities of doing that, where you somehow get through an event or do some sort of physical activity, and then you realize, what was I doing? Because your mind was
right,
somewhere.
right,
So
right.
And
it seems like there's an issue with acting and not being conscious. So what I'm hearing is, I'm wondering, in a heightened stressful situation like a military operation, somebody bangs their head. Now they're responsible for other lives. They're still conscious, well, awake, but they're not conscious of their actions. What are some of the implied risks of somebody being in charge under those circumstances, I guess? Like,
yeah.
why? Yeah.
I mean, in the military situation, your life is dependent upon the person next to you. I mean, in a sport, it's not life and death, but the points are still going to be at risk, right? Or winning will be at risk. So in the military, you're dealing with people who are armed, and their jobs are help to protect you, right? And one another. So if somebody has had a concussion, their reaction time is slowed. Their ability to focus on tasks may be impaired. Obviously, if you are in charge of other people and your job is to protect them with your weapon, and you can't react soon enough, then somebody else's life might be endangered. And so they will try to remove those individuals so that they can actually get help and not be part of a collective that's now sort of broken down. Um, but
Wouldn't you?
that is a relatively new thing. Mhm.
Right. One of the things, Dr. Prins, that I've often thought is, as an athlete and a hyper focused one, again, because I've been doing it since I was 4 years old, during the time that like you said, the brain is able to absorb and is growing, and the knowledge and the feel and the senses are all getting heightened and developed. And I've often said that writing, for me, and the tools that I have in life and have used in my purpose, was they innately and heighten those characteristics and those physical qualities of what I sense, what I feel, what I see, my awareness, my
Mm.
perception of timing, my depth perception, the fact that everything I do here affects what happens there. And that is the one thing that I know in my other times that I've certainly had concussions. They've not been like that one, that happened when I was 15.
Yeah.
I've had ones that were a little bit different, that were more severe, and is a whole nother story. But most of them, you get up, you feel dizzy, you know you're not right, you might um, wait, just have a momentary loss of consciousness, and then the next thing is you don't feel good. You go back and I know that I'm not right, and they check all of that, and certainly in today's world and safety things, we understand that so much better.
Yeah.
So what happens during a concussion? That is the first thing that the average person, if they fall, hit their heads, that so they can recognize the symptoms.
Well, so that is actually a really good point to bring up. And that is that if you have a classic concussion that you see when you watch action films where somebody gets hit, they go down, they lose consciousness. We know that that's a concussion, right? But concussions are really just movement of the brain inside the skull. And I have one of the bio brains that I bring with a lot of the kids that is this gelatinous jelly kind of moving thing. And you can see how it wobbles, right? That's what's going on when you shake your head. So you can have whiplash where you don't lose consciousness, but the brain is moving back and forth inside the skull. When that movement happens rapidly, you can cause disruptions of the cells' connections to one another. And without losing consciousness, you can still have a concussive injury. How do we pick those up? We don't know. There's no imaging modality that lets us see those kinds of very, very mild episodes. Um, you may feel a little bit different, but it is very, very hard to diagnose concussions or to image a concussion unless the person is knocked unconscious or is showing overt impairment and balance. So we do have a number of tests that we do to see like reaction time, balance issues, visual, just to see whether or not we can get better at refining that process. So on the lower scale, it is hard to know when somebody's had a concussion. Then you reach the unconsciousness phase, and then we know you have a concussion.
Right.
So there is a whole bunch of individuals in between there that are going to present in different ways. And so it's not always easy for a person themselves to know that they've been concussed or for doctors to be able to identify when you've had a concussion.
So I know from my own experience of one time, not even on a motorcycle. One time I slipped in the shower at a hotel
Mhm.
and hit my head on the wall. And that's where my mom saying my head was hard. I was happy about that because it didn't knock me out or anything. But I felt obviously I know what it feels like because I have experience with it. And then my first what I sense to be the first symptom is dizziness, is a
Mhm.
little bit of lack of orientation. And so that's the first sign I knew I needed to sit down. I knew my balance would be off. And so I took the necessary steps to make sure I didn't make it worse by falling again or something from the incident itself. And I think that's from my own experience. That is one of the things that I notice. That I certainly do. Um, what if someone has that? How long, in just general terms, have you learned in your studies and everything for inactivity, or what you should do? What should, besides going
Yeah.
to the doctor, but what should the next steps be if my son, one time we were in Las Vegas and he hit his head on the curbing and he started to ride his little scooter back to the house and he was kind of weaving. I knew immediately that, he had a head injury. And so what I did was I took him inside and I said, how do you feel? Do you feel dizzy? And then the next thing is that if he continued for any length of time, we'd take him to the hospital. Is there something like that you've learned that people can, um, think about? What should be the maybe three steps, for
Yeah.
example?
Well, so we do have guidelines, especially for athletes now, which is the blessing, is that we do have strict policies in place in terms of what you do after an incident, right? So upon impact, they are going to get some sort of sports related diagnostics, usually on the sideline, by somebody. Now, this is where we have problems, is that when you're a high schooler or middle schooler, you don't have, the organization of the NFL or your motocross people who are there by you all the time. So you don't have a team of people doing that. And then that really falls onto parents. So younger children, it's really their parents who are going to have to say, okay, you fell, you hit your head. I think you're a little bit off. We're going to go to the doctor. Then the doctor can do the assessments. They'll do visual assessing, they'll do balance assessing, reaction times, just to see whether or not there's any evidence of something. And then usually from the majority of people, a single concussive event will recover with time, right? You'll get back those things with a little bit of rest, and then you'll be able to be normal again. Um, it's when you have a repeating event in sports where you put yourself into high risk situations again, that now you're really vulnerable, right? So there's a lot of denial, especially with adolescents, because they want to play and so they want to go back in. And so getting them to adhere to the return to play guidelines can be very difficult if they're not honest with you about how they're feeling. So they might try to mask a headache. They might try to feign that they, are feeling better, even though they're really not. And so all of those things then can be a problem for honest assessments of return to play. And so that we do fight that a little bit more, I think, in youth sports. In the professional athlete world, I think you have a lot of people already there really monitoring the situation. So they're constantly being evaluated and assessed. And so the likelihood of them being able to get away from that is not as easy. But the real risk is the fact that if you go back in before you're healed from that concussive event, and you have another concussive event that overlaps, now you're going to have a greater magnitude of recovery time. So now it's going to take you much longer to get better. And so now instead of having two separate events separated by time, you're now having overlapping events.
Mm.
That is what we don't want to see people do, is having overlapping events. And I think a lot of people then start to question, like boxing and some of these sports where kids are getting hit repeatedly, and whether or not we should do that. But I think that sports are really important. Activity is
Yes,
really important.
I agree.
It is incredibly positive in so many ways, that there is a balance between being able to do these things, but then also respecting yourself and your own health by following some of the policies by the people who are trying to guide you. And if you're honest about those things until you recover, then your risk for the subsequent or longer impact is going to be minimized.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it almost sounds like the most vulnerable community, the adolescents, are the ones who are kind of least protected at this point with protocols and what have you, and are the ones who might be least honest with their assessment.
Yeah.
So in my experience as a downhill ski racing coach, I worked with 10 to 12-year-olds. It was a U10 or U12 age group. And so we were trained in protocol concussion protocol, and kids fall all the time when you're skiing. And I only had one incident where I did an assessment and took the racer to get help. But I did notice that there was resistance.
Hmm.
They want to keep skiing. They want to
Yeah.
play with their friends. They don't want to miss the race. And so I have noticed a little bit of that pushback, and understanding now that the compounding effects with that vulnerable community as their brains are developing is really really important for coaches to be trained and for parents to be able to recognize and assess the children themselves.
This is exactly one of the reasons why we keep trying to find biomarkers or some sort of way of assessing these lower level concussions so that we can take the child out of the equation. Uh,
Mhm.
but yes, there's also a social element to,
Mhm.
especially adolescents in sports. You're developing a lot of your interpersonal skills. And so your community is what you're being alienated from. And then there's also the competitiveness with the other students or the other athletes that might get more time to play than you.
Hmm.
And it's a complicated relationship that helps induce the dishonesty or their desire to kind of, feign that they've recovered earlier than they have. And so that age group in particular is harder to deal with than when you get to more collegiate athletes who have the backings of the, professional world around them a little bit more. So yes, I think the junior group is the hardest one to honestly assess.
Well, one of the things that you said that I think is so important is the fact of the parents.
Mhm.
And you could look back at my dad. He didn't know what to look for. I'm sure, as he said, I looked a little off on Sunday when I had that crash and was knocked out, and I was still raced. Don't remember it, but being aware of what the symptoms are is the point I think is important, and that's something I know at the top level of the sport that I'm in has changed so much to where now if riders hit the ground, they check the helmet, they see where the helmet's been impacted, they know what parts of the brain, they do an assessment, they do an MRI, they check their balance. They have the luxury of that, and it's really out of the athlete's, or in this case the rider's hand,
Yeah.
of what they can do. They don't really, they're not in charge of whether they can race or not. That is
Right.
something that the doctor
Yeah.
in the situation, and I think that's such a movement in the right direction, certainly from the organizations and the structure part of how the sports are reacting to it, because we're seeing, Junior Seau, perfect example of who was a great linebacker for the San Diego Chargers, and one of the nicest people from what I understand, and was amazing with the community, and he took his own life, and
Yeah.
it shocked everyone. He retired, and it just was so out of character, and it was one, I think, if I'm not mistaken, one of the kind of first things that really got people, there's
Yeah.
something going on here. And
Yeah.
so, unfortunately, it takes tragedy sometimes,
Yeah.
to inspire, but it also takes the effort of people like you, Dr. Prins, and that's what I respect that so much and appreciate it that so much, to be at the forefront of ways, as you've talked about today, to understand it, but also understand that the answer is not to get rid of the sports,
Yeah.
right? Because they provide, I know myself, it's provided everything in my life and opportunities for me. And I'm not talking about standing on the podium, winning a Grand Prix and national anthem on that day. That's wonderful, but that's kind of icing on the cake. The other is the, as you said, the social interactions. That's what we don't want parents to,
Right.
right, to
Yeah.
do, to take their kids away. There has
Yeah.
to be that balance, and I agree with you, and I appreciate so much you making that point, because I feel the same way. I still ride, and I've had brain injuries, but the precautions I take the best I can to avoid putting myself in situations, at my age, 64, I wouldn't do. I was just riding in France last weekend.
Yeah. It
And
is easier when you have somebody else assessing you, though, right?
yes, yes, yes,
The
yes,
parents tend to be all varieties. You get some that are a little too involved, right? And they're like, "Do you have a headache? Do you have a headache? Do you have a headache?" Until they give the child a headache from assessing them. Or you have some that are just not around as much. And so then, the kids are not getting that kind of supervision. So it is difficult to find a balance for parents and how they assess this. We do try to work with parents and educate parents about real risks because parents are not good at risk assessment. Many will be so quick to pull their kids out of sports and say, that's it. You're not doing this anymore because you've had a head injury. But then they'll turn
right.
around and give them the car keys to drive in Los Angeles, which is a
Right.
way bigger risk than the actual concussions. And so oftentimes when we're too familiar with an activity, we don't see those risks anymore. And so talking to parents about real risk and the importance of what sports actually provides in a positive light, the physical activity, really important right now. Exercise is very important. And
That
you
was
have
one
this,
of the questions that I was going to ask you. Yes.
yeah,
Is can you elaborate on how does, prior conditioning
yeah,
change how the brain responds to the injury? And the reason I say that is because I think that because of the fact of my preparation and the physical from the physical side, the mental side, the focus, truly just the will and desire. I believe, I don't know from knowledge, but from experience, that I think it does it help you? Does it help it be not as bad, or does it help it to recovery time in any way? And how quickly should you get back to those activities?
yeah.
Physical,
Well,
like in everyday
being an
life, just
yeah,
exercising.
being an athlete is very different. I mean, you see the difference between kids who are couch potatoing with the, video games and stuff, and their health is very different, right? So an athlete is going to be much more disciplined, much more focused, and physically fit, right? So when they have a concussion, they can be much more aware of their own body. But I think that they have a better opportunity to go back to activity over, a period of few days once they feel better. I know we used to put them in a dark room and say, okay, stay here and be still until you feel well. And obviously that was very isolating and that actually made things worse.
Okay.
So now the premise is that when you have one, we just want you to listen to your body, take care of
Okay.
yourself, go slow a little bit for the first few days, see how you are. When you start to get okay with general movement, then great. And then if you want to try to do mild walking and you don't become symptomatic, then you might be ready for the next step. And so there is now a gradual return to play guidelines that we have. And the neurology team will use that to help the athletes follow their return to sport and then to contact kind
Okay.
of things. And so athletes in general are going to recover pretty well because they're physically fit, they're disciplined, they are used to following rules. And so I think that their time course for recovery is better. It's harder too because they want to go back so badly that they might be
Right.
inclined to push it a little bit more. So that's why having an outside person guiding that is very helpful.
Well, I
Um,
think that is an excellent point, and I think that will help someone out there listening. And certainly, my understanding, it confirmed what I always believed. Again, just through experience. And so, that's going to help. Is there any place, where can they go? Where can the person listening out there go for these guidelines? Is there a website or a link or a place that you can?
yeah, I mean, there are return to play guidelines available online. You can see what the process usually is, and it's
Okay.
really just looking at certain kinds of symptoms. Headache is often one of them, uh, and just being much more aware of how you're feeling in the first couple of days as you start to resume normal activities. You do not need to sit in a dark room and
Okay.
be isolated from other people, but you do want to be, I think, more aware of how you're feeling. If you have a headache, that, may not be great for you to go out and participate in a whole bunch of things. The other problem too is sleep, right? We have teenagers in general, their sleep cycles are completely off because they need a lot more sleep during that window of growth and development. And we start our school systems at the ungodly time of 8 o'clock in the morning for them. So we're forcing them to kind of be off kilter to begin with. Um, but concussions can also interrupt the sleep cycle. And so in teenagers, that makes it even more difficult for them during that time period. It affects adults as well. So professional athletes will have this as well,
Yes.
where it's disrupted by, the the concussion, and that's not unusual, and it usually dissipates. For your average person, if you're aware of just educating yourself with, the basics of what a concussion is like, you can guide yourself through that process. Um, it's people who don't really know or have problems that are unique. Like if you are somebody who has migraines to begin with, and then you have these issues. A lot of women who have concussions have a lot more headache related issues. That's when it's nice to have a neurologist or a primary care doctor giving you the advice and guidance to monitor and look for some of these kinds of things.
Okay.
But I don't think everybody, requires that.
Well, I think the point, that as you said, is awareness and paying attention to it, and also and I reiterate the fact of don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, just because you can be susceptible, could have head injuries. Take precautions. It's like my son and daughter rode mini bikes, when they were old enough, 4, 5, 6 years old, and because that's where I started. Neither one of them raced. My daughter's a teacher, and my son works in the auto business. But I made sure they had the best protection possible. It didn't matter the fact of I would talk to some parents that would say, "Well, they grow out of it so fast, and so I don't want to spend the money." And my question was, and this is kind of harsh, I would say, well, if tomorrow and they're in a coma in the hospital, how much money would you spend to
Yeah.
not have them there? And so I think the preventative side, being smart about that, is one of the points that I'm glad we got across today. And the fact that sports brings and activity brings so many positive things. Sure,
Yeah.
there's some risk, but precautions, awareness, training, there's so many things that I believe in and I share in what I do, coming from a risky
Hmm.
job. But trust me, do everything possible to ensure the safety side
Yeah.
before I ever even start the activity. And
Yeah.
so that's kind of my final comment about that, and then I'll leave it to Camille to if she has the last question and to kind of close the show. But it's it's such a subject that I think has not been talked about enough.
Yeah.
And a lot of times just from an emotional standpoint of again the doing it or not doing it. Oh, it's risky, not going to do it, and then missing the other parts that you benefit from.
So my question, I'm wondering if this tracks, but from your studies in athletes and the younger community who is more active and has been engaged in sports and training and accepting risk and maybe engaging with it, that when the impact comes, they are better calibrated to recover from it more quickly than somebody who potentially hasn't engaged with risk at all and has a more sedentary looking brain, that same hit could be more devastating or take longer to recover from when the hit comes. Is that correct?
I think that in general, yes. I mean, the activity also provides a motivation for people to want to get better,
Hmm.
right? So they have something that they're looking forward to that they want to regain, contact with. So I do think they're more motivated to actually, play by the rules and try to recover. Um, but I think, outside of understanding just the recovery of a single concussion, we really are, it's important to make sure that the athletes understand that overlapping your injuries is going to exacerbate things.
Hmm.
And then the last part of that is really when they're adolescents, you're thinking about, their sports career. But we have to go beyond that and realize that a lifetime accumulation of head injuries, especially overlapping head injuries, can exacerbate the risk for what we call proteinopathies like the CTE, the amyloid, tau protein accumulations, because all of those proteins are um, metabolic waste products. So when your brain cells are doing their job, they produce waste. And normally those get flushed out during the nighttime while you're sleeping, those proteins will get cleared out by the lymphatic system. When you have head injuries, you can disrupt that process. And so gradually some of those proteins may not get cleared as much. And then you think like over a lifetime, if you're continuing to do these things, you can then have these other kinds of problems that develop. We have not done, or it's been difficult to do lifetime studies because obviously they're very expensive and people are so different. You'd have to do a very large population study. But we are starting to see now that, a lot of the Alzheimer's and tauopathies are increasing in the incidence in elderly people. And
Okay.
so that is something to take into account when you're looking at your lifetime accumulation is, where are you going to put that? Obviously, the teenage window seems a little bit better in terms of recovery potential because they're younger. But as you become older, it's much more vulnerable. And so there's that balance that we have to really look at as well. So,
May I make one offering in closing? As you were describing the sort of accumulated effects of these, I'm thinking about behaviorally, like microaggressions, and
mhm,
then not addressing it when somebody offends you, and you're like, oh, I'll just like worry about that later. And then these microaggressions kind of keep coming and building because the waste isn't being flushed out. And so then someone says something and you react out of balance with it. I'm wondering if that kind of tracks to this like waste accumulating in your brain from repeated impacts and then one hits and has sort of a massive effect. Does that analogy kind of track?
well, I mean, not just specifically to behavioral responses like aggression. I
Hmm.
think that the dementia has components of it that
Hmm.
can be involved with hostility, aggression, frustration. And so there are dynamics there. It also depends on what areas of the brain are particularly damaged from the concussions you sustain. Right?
Hmm.
So if you have more areas that are involved in rage or sensitivities like the hypothalamus or the amygdala, that can affect more of that kind of behavior in some people than others.
Mm.
Right.
Some people can have depression more, and then we see some of these suicidal ideations or fear that come up. And then we see that with military personnel as well, right? With post-traumatic stress when they have
Right.
concussion and fear of going back in. So those are all common, responses, and we do have to pay attention to those people and provide them with good care. Right now, the best care is usually in the athletic realm, right? So as we go into the Olympics coming up, that will be a really big thing. But we also have Paralympians that we have to think about. And how
Right.
do you baseline test people who don't have vision?
Hmm.
How do you baseline test people in a wheelchair?
Hmm.
And so we do have to kind of think about how we adapt to different cultures and different environments. And what do we do with the kids who are amazing athletes who come from communities that don't have supplies, don't have the resources, don't have
Right.
access? And so that then expands this immensity of the problem that we're dealing with. Um,
Right.
but progress is being made, at least, we're
Yes.
slowly moving towards there, and it's an exciting time. And learning about some of the stories from people and their experiences is always really important.
Well, I feel like I've contributed to this because I brought up a question that you haven't really had before. So, that's why not? Yeah. So, Um, well, Dr. Prince, thank you so much
Well, thank you.
for being on our podcast today, and I'll leave it to Camille to close out the show. But I just wanted to say one last thing, that in racing, the fact that the machine still runs does not mean it really is ready to race, which is kind of one of the points we've talked about today. And we should think about the brain in the same way. And so, wrapping up, it's about awareness, paying attention, and then your question, Camille, was perfect about how it affects behavior, because I think so many things that happen later in life, if you understand what started it, it's better able to address it. It's like if someone out there is suffering from depression, instead of being focused on what's wrong with me, why am I like, I'm struggling emotionally with depression. There could be physical reasons why, and that helps to get the right help, right? So people, you know paying attention to what their kids do. Like I said, the story about Connor hitting his kid when he was 5, I remember like it's yesterday. And I paid attention to it because of what I experienced and made sure that he didn't have any lasting effects as best I could. So thank you again for being on that. Camille, I'll leave you to close the show and look forward to next time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Prince. And when you're leaving us, if you could give us like your top three things that parents, people listening can be aware of if they hit their head, if a friend hit their head, what they should check just to when they should go to the hospital and when they shouldn't. If there's just like a quick rule of thumb that you'd like to share with the community.
Okay. Did you want me to write that down to you or send it,
Oh
or you?
no, yeah,
Or,
no,
oh,
whatever,
oh,
yeah, whatever your 2 cents
so
are.
I think that's always a difficult question for parents, right? Is whenever a child hits their head, the parent has a sense of their child. If you feel that your child is off, especially if they're very young and they can't verbalize, then go with your gut. Go see somebody. It's better to see somebody and have nothing than to not go in.
Yeah.
Okay.
When they get older, I think sometimes parents have to be a little bit clever in observing without like pushing, because then you get their versions of things and not really a good objective, awareness of how they're behaving. If they lose consciousness, then by all means, you should probably take them in just to make sure that there are no, hidden problems that are going on. Sometimes we can have brain bleeds that accompany these things. And so you just want to kind of have a neurologist or a primary care physician look at them and monitor them a little bit.
Error on the side of caution, right?
Safe caution with, not everything is a fire, but
Right.
you want to be proactive about making sure that you follow up with these things. And then, also try to help them along with the fact that they're going to get better. The concussions are usually going to get better. So we don't want to be overly alarming to the family. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. This was
Thank
an awesome
you
conversation. I appreciate having you. And
so
thank you so
much.
much to our listeners. And tune in next time. And thank you so much, Dr. Prince.